And if things change, you will know as people will tell you. Okay, my panel. I'm Amrit, I'll be your chair. I have no preferences for pronouns, but just refer to us as a panel. We'll go on the order that is on the tab. Emery?
Hi, I'm Emery. I used it exclusively, but panel's fine.
And then Matt?
Oh, sorry, Matt, even pronouns.
Sam?
Oh, Sam, no particular preference.
And Yarn?
He, him, Yarn, good luck, teams.
All right, cool. Can someone on the panel, Matt, my good friend from ANU, you will be timing this round. So 1, 6,
Sorry,
7.
I am on my phone, so that's going to be a bit of a pain. Is someone else able to?
I will type. It's okay. I can do it.
Sorry about that.
All good. But everyone also just keep your own time. At 7:15, not writing, so just stop speaking. Okay. Are there any questions before we start? If you're an observance round, just the normal rules apply. Don't talk. Don't unmute. Don't do anything. Just exist. If you do anything above that, you will be kicked out. Okay. All right. Yes. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to start this semi-finals. Here.
Okay, for POIs, please offer them in the chat. The problem with Metaverse and all virtual systems that are being created by private companies is that they are literally being created to bring as much money and as much profit to these companies and are not concerned with maximizing the welfare of people who are using these systems whatsoever. I'm going to talk about a few things in this speech. Firstly, just some preemption. Secondly, why this is likely to be a system that's going to be highly addictive and problems with that. Thirdly, data concerns that come with this. And then finally, why this just capitalizes companies way more and a bunch of harms that extend from that. So I think in terms of like what the Metaverse primarily is kind of an online virtual world where you are kind of still using this virtual world like as a social media forum for some social media things, for like economic interactions, for gaming and other kinds of applications. I think of Op wants to run material of like, this is really good for identity formation and this makes people happier. I just think that there are a bunch of vehicles in the real world where you're able to like do that, especially with other technology that exists. So you can still socialize with people via Zoom or via Skype. It's not exclusive to this platform whatsoever. And in terms of things like identity fulfillment, I think you can get this with like real life people. So they're often like support groups that exist, you have a marginalized identity, et cetera, et cetera. I think that if anything, there's a time trade-off between interacting with people in the real world, given that this is addictive, in which case we prefer that other comparative, insofar as these relationships are often a lot more long-lasting, given that they're often family members and long-term friends, rather than the fickle relationships that you form, and therefore emotional investment in that is a better alternative. First major contribution, why are these systems engineered to be things that are likely to be highly addictive? So I think that firstly, like Facebook, who is creating this system, have an incentive to make you want to buy things in these virtual worlds because that is a key way that they're able to profit from it. Therefore, in order to cause you to buy things, they need to maximize the immersive quality of these systems overall, and then also get you to spend as much time on these systems that you maximize the number of purchases that you're able to make. Therefore, they have an incentive to design these systems where they have like mini games on them, for example, that cause high levels of serotonin to go into your brain after you do that. Which they often will literally hire like psychologists. They have a bunch of tricks, which is why Facebook is a thing under the status quo where they have like the red emojis that pop up because it gives your brain serotonin when you see them. But secondly, like various features of what the world is itself makes it inherently addictive, even regardless of the incentives of what these companies are. So insofar as this is kind of an immersive world that is removing you from the mundane stress of life, which Op will probably say is like a good thing, you just often enjoy being on there in the short term. I think that what differentiates this from other kinds of social media is the realism of it. So you feel like you are satiating your desire for social interaction to a large extent, even though it is not giving you that in the context of the real world. What then are the problems with this? So firstly, there are often payments within these apps that individuals are able to make, which then detracts from like other ways that they could spend their money. So there's a bunch of people in the metaverse under the status quo who are buying virtual property. I think the problem with this is that they're often irrational purchases, given the way that the game has an incentive to engineer your brainwave to do all these things, which not only means that there's like a lack of consent, but also you literally could be using this money for substantially better things. I think that the second problem with this is there's often just a time trade-off between people doing other things other than like existing on the metaverse. They might say, why does it matter if there's a time trade-off if this makes you happy? I think that like you might not want to exist in the metaverse or play these games forever, especially as you age and have more responsibility, in which case there's a sunk cost and time that you spend at the meta universe rather than doing other things like studying might have actually benefited you in the long term to a large extent. Before I get into our argument about data concerns, I'll take closing.
So wait, is this totally non-exclusive from other vehicles for fulfillment, or is this so uniquely immersive and something that is so fulfilling it gives you pleasure beyond anything else?
So like, I think that it is more addictive than other things, but I don't think that it means that it's more fulfilling than other things. I think that these are like two kind of separate psychological categories. I think you can be addicted to things that are not necessarily good for you. Second major contribution. What are the huge data concerns of this? So I think in terms of like why there is a lot more data than this and other ways that companies like Facebook and Nike can harness data is that firstly, the degree of time in which you're spending in the metaverse is substantially larger than time that you're spending on other social media. But secondly, and more importantly, the way that data can be gathered when you're physically interacting with other people is substantially more comprehensive than in a system where you're just like clicking on things in an algorithm. These are literally things like the speech patterns that you are using. These are literally things like a very complex understanding of social preferences that you have. So if you have a meta universe with a bunch of people, it's like who are the first kind of people that you're drawn into, which can give a very intimate look at the way that your brain ultimately operates. Even if you're like listening to music in the metaverse, the way that you are bobbing your head and responding to different lyrics can give a tremendous degree of psychological insight that ultimately exists. Crucially, I think the meta universe, something that's extremely difficult to regulate in this regard when it comes to the use of data. This is because it is something that is evolving extremely quickly. It's something that Facebook is developing fast, and therefore there's always going to be a lag between the understanding of regulators and the kind of thing that companies are ultimately engaging in. Why then do we care about a much higher threshold of data being harnessed? I also want to note here firstly that like even if Facebook has a lot of data under the status quo, other companies what they say in the info side like Nike are investing in the metaverse who have less vehicles to access data under the status quo. Firstly, there's often a selling off this information to the highest bidder, so you're likely to get more situations like Cambridge Analytica happening, which generates a high degree of profit for these companies, which is bad because data is then weaponized in a way that benefits other actors without the consent of individuals. So things like electoral manipulation become substantially easier when private companies have data, they're contracted by a political party, and therefore they can influence things like voting substantially more. I think that the other harm of this is that targeted advertising gets substantially more pernicious when the understanding of you is a lot more intimate. It's not the case that you're being shown things that actually reflect your own preferences, but it's often engineering biases that you may have. So if you're a very insecure person, then you present to a form of advertising that shows you that you might be able to get a higher degree of validation that exists, thereby incentivizing individuals to buy a product when they may not otherwise want to. Finally, the problem with this is that this just gives companies like way more money relative to the amount of money that they have under the status quo. This is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as we've already characterized, one of the primary ways that companies are profiting off of this is that there are purchases that individuals are able to make on these apps. So you're often buying private property. There's other things that they can buy to kind of use social clout on these apps. Therefore, this is a newfound profit stream. But secondly, the delta of advertising revenue that you can extract from this is substantially higher. So like there could literally be like a virtual forms of advertising rather than companies having an ad on Facebook where they're literally able to like set shop, which appears to be more of a virtual reality to a much larger extent, meaning that the amount of money that you can extract from these companies is substantially larger when you're literally exposing these people to purchases in the real world. What this then means is that companies like Facebook and like Nike are likely to get substantially richer. The problem with this is that this massively increases on the political leverage that these companies ultimately have, where lobbying efforts become substantially easier when you can pay off like a higher number of Congress people in order to get the policies that you want. I think that this is bad because these are extremely powerful companies who are literally like the new public forum for speech that have to be regulated in order to stop a variety of things. Like things that we saw from the recent Facebook whistleblower, where like Facebook is engaging in horrible practices on Instagram to maximize likes, even if this is harming things like body image, regulating that, privacy issues that are existing under the status quo, and selling huge amounts of data that exists. Given that this is not just Facebook, and it's also non-tech companies like Nike, also other bad practices. So things like abuses that are existing within supply chains, are trying to shift toward green energy. All these things require political support to actually crack some of these companies, which is unlikely to occur when caps that these companies have over the state become substantially larger. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to stand in opening government.
All right, thank you very much. I now like to invite the leader of opposition. Here.
Okay, can I get a confirmation I'm audible?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Before moving into the short-term and long-term outlooks of this technology, let's first explain why it's going to be accessible to a large amount of individuals. Not anything CEO is going to run, insofar as it's going to run benefits, is necessarily going to be contingent on access. We will already win on that. Couple of mechanisms. Insofar as when you surmount the initial cost of investment and the initial research and development, and through economics of scale, you can easily reproduce this technology. It becomes cheaper over time. But even if the latest iteration of virtual reality is expensive, as technology becomes obsolete, the more inferior variants, however better than what we have today, are still going to be accessible to people. Thirdly, and secondly, opening government concedes there's a market incentive to make this accessible to a large amount of individuals insofar as you're able to access aggregate profits. Thirdly, if anyone on government bench wants to talk about monopolies, and open government implies they exist, monopolies are what enables these companies to provide these services for free insofar as they have a large market share, which allows them to attract customers by providing certain elements of service for free. Think like we have Google Maps today, which is free, which wouldn't be in a world with competition, which is to say a large amount of individuals are going to be able to be accessed this very soon. Secondly, that the open government can see the technology is developing very rapidly, which means that the capacities of these technology are going to rise relatively quickly. Intuition pump, 40 years ago, we had a Commodore 64, we played Snake, we were very happy. Today, the technologies we have today were literally simulated in pop culture, movies like Back to the Future, because they were thought too futuristic. Open government concedes the fast development. This means they're also going to concede the benefits we're going to run. Before we move on to those benefits, just quickly on data selling. First of all, non-comparative. Individuals are already aware, just as opening government is aware that their data is being sold. They choose the utility of social media is larger than the disutility of this data being sold. Insofar as one company has your data like Facebook, they sell it to other companies like Yahoo, like Amazon. Literally everyone has your data. I'm unsure what's the tipping point, but gut check. Naomi just doesn't like big corporations. I don't know why advertisements are bad. Insofar as algorithms can cross-reference our preferences to these advertisements, we're more likely to get services that are tailored to us. What augmented reality does is it's able to show us a perception of what actually might be the use of this product, because we get to use it in virtual reality, which means we get an algorithm that gives us our preferences, but it's actually in fact our preferences. I'm not sure why they have a comparative here. On the benefits of this technology, first of all, in the shorter time period, not Mark Zuckerberg says, and OG concedes this, very soon we're going to be able to simulate interactions in virtual reality as if they were realistic. This has a couple of benefits. First of all, it bridges the empathy gap, because you're able to create simulations of people's lived experiences that are realistic and literally put people in the shoes of other individuals. Note that for the rise of social movements, especially not just in the developed world, but also the developing world, it was incredibly important to share personal stories. The reason why Me Too became global is because people shared stories of what sexual assault actually meant. Their visceral experiences made people relate to them. Note that the comparative is we're now able to bridge the language gap. Insofar as it's very often hard to describe in language what you've actually experienced, because there's always a barrier between language and the emotion that stands behind it. You're now able to have BLM, who doesn't have a Facebook page, they have a simulation which they can give out and have people live the life of a black man in America, which we think people are going to access because they want to check their biases. Because when people are confronted with their biases, it creates cognitive dissonance, which means we're able to reach out to a large amount of individuals and create empathy. We think most people are empathetic. The reason why they don't act, why they don't change their day-to-day behavior, is because they don't realize the lived experiences of others. This allows for increased and enhanced advocacy. We think it bridges the empathy gap and creates better lives for individuals. But secondly, it allows us to simulate policy solutions. First of all, we're able to simulate the application of a product, not my mechanism on targeted advertisement. We're able to simulate the impacts of infrastructural projects and so on and so forth, which means I can simulate whether a building is going to crumble in an earthquake before an earthquake happens. I can simulate whether there are inborn inherent flaws in a product before people use that product, which means that we are able to resolve problems before they actually harm individuals, which means a priori we prevent innocent third-party harm. Rudimentary versions of this technology are already being used. This is why we have more earthquake-resistant buildings today than we had before. But secondly, we're able to simulate problems and issues. Note that one of the largest pushes for climate change currently, and the reason why green parties were able to get traction in countries like Germany, where they were not able before, is they were able to more viscerally reach out to people than they were before. Things like actually simulating what it looks when Florida is underwater and experiencing this in augmented reality. As a guy in Florida holding my cell phone, knowing it's going to be me drowning under that water in 20 years, this creates a push and a perception that I'm actually in danger, which means that we can create mobilization to solve problems. And when we create that mobilization, we're more efficient at solving them, because not that every policy solution is necessarily unpredictable. And insofar as we fuck up in one policy solution, it's an opportunity cost and a sunk cost, because we wasted time and we wasted money. We can now test solutions before we try them, which means that we're able to save time, which means we're simply more efficient in terms of delivering better lives to people, but specifically more efficient in terms of delivering solutions to urgent crises like climate change, like COVID. We might have simulated whether our vaccine works on a spike protein of a specific mutation that hasn't yet appeared and adapted our vaccine to it. Less people are going to die, insofar as there's an incentive for these companies to make it accessible to other corporations. For OG's own analysis, we get that benefit. But secondly, I want to talk about the long-term proliferation of this technology, which is to say, opening government has to oppose this in the long term and in its most advanced form. What does it mean? This technology allows you to create an avatar. You can look how you want and when you want. You can literally create your own world. Naomi says there's a replacement in the real world. Couple of benefits this gives you. First of all, it gives you access to things you're a priori locked out of because of your own personal characteristics or the world you live in. Not all people can access friendships and romantic attraction. They can now access that utility. Insofar as there's no objective truth, subjective utility is the thing you want to maximize. Secondly, it provides you access to experiences with people that you actually want to do. It's a different thing if I talk about baseball or actually play baseball. It's a different thing if I have a long distance relationship or I actually have a real relationship with the person that's next to me. I cannot access it if that person is in North America. Thirdly, it gives me maybe access to experiences I've always wanted, but might not have had because of my geographical constraints, because of my birth constraints, things that I might not necessarily have in the real world. Before I move on to further explaining the impact, I'll take closing government. Opening government.
So everything that you say about empathy is uncomparative. The far right could also use this to promote empathy in their own way, like blowing up a story of an immigrant who assaulted certain individuals, especially because this is still functioning on the basis of algorithms.
If you are correct that this creates empathy, I just explained why it creates more empathy. What does we get on our side of the house? We also get control. In virtual reality, you cannot get assaulted. You cannot get killed because it's your fucking world, which means you have more control above the world around you, especially important if you're a minority who cannot avoid this in the real life, which means that you get access to safety in your own experiences and the right to self-representation. Here's what's important. Naomi says it's addictive. I don't care. Addictive is not inherently bad, which is to say the people who are going to use this because of Naomi's own analysis as to why the real world is cool are not going to use this if they have the replacement in the real world, particularly if the media are going to report. You're going to have whistleblowers, as Naomi says, that currently exist. The people who use this are the people who need this. Lastly, I want to claim people have a right to self-representation insofar as nobody ever interacts with who we are as the crux of a being. They only ever interact with the image of us that we represent. Insofar as, therefore, presenting our image the way we want to be represented is the prerequisite for us to represent ourselves in the way we want in terms of our identity. We're able to have people who cannot come out as gay to be gay in virtual reality. People who experience gender dysphoria cannot get therapy, can now be trans in virtual reality. They can access their right to self-representation and to represent their image in the way they want. We help individuals who need this. I've never won more from opening opposition.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd like to invite the DPM to conclude OG's case. Here.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. OO may be right that these worlds can help people to bridge empathy gaps, but they are entirely incorrect that people will do it in the right ways. Rather, we will see the effects, corrosive effects of social media and the status quo amplified as people visualize content that matches their political views. Some people may decide to opt in to simulating climate change, but that's deeply unpleasant. Others will go back into fun historical stuff. So I would just want to point something out, right? As technology has developed to make more and more immersive worlds, as we've gotten video games, as we've gotten more, live and better camera quality, have we actually seen an increase in video games that spread social messages that are more immersive? I think no. I think video games broadly are immersive, fun, historical worlds that don't platform social issues, and in fact do it way less than less immersive forms of television. Why? Because the more immersed you are, the more fun you can have and the more pure hedonism can exist. So some people might decide to opt into experiencing racism, but that sounds deeply unpleasant. The majority of even progressive people would never decide to do this. But I think instead, people are able to retreat into the virtual world to escape from the problems of reality, to not read the news about what's happening, to not stop climate change because they can exist in a virtual world. So as long as we believe that that you can hide from problems in life, like hide your sexuality, hide your life, then you can also run away from the problem of climate change that is destroying other people's countries and emerge into a virtual world unaffected by the consequences of your actions. I think that is far worse. The first thing I want to address is who controls this world, because when OO says you cannot be assaulted or killed in this world, my response is like literally says who? Like Facebook says, and I think that gets at the problem of these worlds, which is that content regulation and laws are all determined by a central authority that is 100% undemocratic and runs on the basis of a profit incentive. Off is right. Facebook gives things out for free. That worked really well for them when they made it free to get onto Facebook, and now sell your data when you have no choice but to leave. Opt is like people opt into this. Like, no, we do not at all. Obviously, the platform effect means that we cannot opt in. So once people exist in a virtual world and have virtual homes and virtual property, this means Facebook can start charging real world rents onto people for these costs, given that there is no escaping from a virtual world. If it is true that business and commerce will change, that in order to get try on products and do all these benefits, the virtual world is great, then there will be a form of reliance. But the problem is that all policing of freedom of speech in this world, for example, is run by Facebook. Their content moderation office, which we know gets it wrong all the time, is going to be in charge of deciding what you can say in this world. This is far worse than Facebook deciding to ban people on the basis of arbitrary reasons for speech. Why? Because you live in this world, and Op is like, well, this is great. You don't have to ever leave it. And in fact, we concede all of prop. But if Facebook bans your speech for 24 hours for the wrong reason in this world, then your entire reality is now being screwed over with no potential for democratic deliberation. If Op responds and says Facebook will recreate democracy in this world, like literally why? They have zero reason to do this, and no one will demand it in a meaningful way since they have hedonistic pleasures that they can enjoy, like video games and simulations. This means that there is no incentive for accountability. But the second reason there is no incentive for accountability is that this will make Facebook more money. Why? More data points to collect off of your entire experience in this world, your sleep habits, the things you say. All of this means that they get more money to fine tune the algorithm, means they can buy other businesses and use the algorithm to scale up their targeting of products. You can try on products in this virtual world. If you have augmented reality, it means that some people, even in the real world, will walk down a street corner. And instead, when they look at people, they'll see a virtual bubble showing their profile. Op is getting two ideas for their arguments from Black Mirror. In one of them, it allows people to block their exes in this world. And in the episode they reference where you can be gay in this world and change your identity, that Black Mirror episode did not end well. But the second thing that I do want to illustrate is that hiding from your identity in this world is more likely to mean that A, when you have to inevitably leave this world, because obviously you can't spend all your time in there, the problems will still be worse, won't have built up coping mechanisms or support groups or moved away from an abusive situation. And second of all, I just don't think it's true that you can hide your reality in this world. The data leaks and data theft that will occur will provide perverse incentives for not having privacy in this world. And there's no guarantee that there will be. So there's no ability to opt out. The second thing that I then want to illustrate, echo chambers. Why do they get so much worse? I'll note in this argument that a lot of the LO arguments here are that you can simulate policy and simulate the real world very effectively using the metaverse. This is not exclusive. Like bridges don't fall down because engineers have really good simulations that don't require anyone to be in a virtual reality. There's computer simulations. Like all the technological progress they cite is like literally not exclusive to the metaverse at all. The second thing that they say, which is a little bit more details, like we can model how people respond to vaccines. They literally have formal mathematical models for this. And if you're running population level experiments on people in the metaverse to get better data, this seems way, way worse. So I do not understand why these benefits from OO are remotely exclusive. Their claim is that this won't be a tipping point for data collection or for the harms of social media. But I think when people have AR headsets where they can walk down the street, where when you walk into a store, the cashier can have your data, your employment history, the amount of money you have, and then tell you what products to buy on the basis of info that they know. I think a world where you walk down the street and people have glasses where they can block out homeless people on the street who they find unpleasant because they have augmented reality is one that is far worse, because there's literally no escaping from the virtual world where you have augmented reality. All the harms that we noted in terms of being able to retreat into your echo chambers are far larger. You don't have to see poor people on the street because you have technology that can block it out, because a third-party seller can buy that for you. But I think that the second thing to observe on this technology is like the benefits that Op gives in terms of the simulations for people's experiences and the empathy gap aren't real. You can bridge the language gap is one of the arguments. Advances in real-time translation mean that people can speak in English and have a translator say it in French over a computer, not exclusive. Second thing that they say is that simulations of people's circumstances are at the very least good, because even if non-woke people don't opt in, then you can develop more empathy. I think that the fact that people are able to develop empathy is the result of reading and knowing about the world, which they'll do less in this world because of addiction to social media. CO.
I think you falsely presume that when people see something negative in real life, they will have a positive reaction, when in fact, in many instances, like your example, people may choose to implement anti-homeless policies to get them out of their sight.
So I just think that a world where we can't see homeless people and therefore have no reason to donate or ever care about them is far worse than a world where you have anti-homeless spikes put on benches. Like, I think that argument is so fully non-comparative. They're saying if you don't know about groups, you can't actively oppress them. The fact that you don't know about existing inequalities means that those inequalities will always remain locked in society. So if CO wants to run with that, it's a very uphill battle. The last thing that I then want to illustrate is why the extent of addiction is going to be very bad. When you leave this world, you'll have a deep feeling of regret, and you feel basically terrible because you're addicted by the algorithm and addicted to the kinds of interactions that you're having in this world. This means that you can't exist in this world constantly because there are other kinds of obligations that exist, or in a world where alternate reality exists, there's literally no escape from it. So either you feel empty when you leave the world and therefore go back, increasing the control of Facebook in terms of being able to have regulatory power over governments because no one wants to give up their digital world or digital property, or in terms of people feeling hollow and empty when they leave these worlds and therefore consistently going back. We think that a future of the metaverse is unaccountable, unpredictable, and has benefits that are unexclusive, but terrible harms for the most vulnerable people. We are proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much. I now like to invite the DLO to close top half of this debate. Here.
I hope I can be heard.
Yep.
Cool. Give me a sip of water. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. The crux of OG is two things: data control and addiction. Firstly, on the point of data control and profit and welfare, right? They say, oh, company is going to try to make money from you. This is not necessarily true, because we've shown that Facebook and Instagram are also addictive and they're not paid, and that not paid service is something that is an incentive of these companies. Even if they are going to be paid, why is this a bad thing? Consider, I am willing to spend money on that which brings me more utility than this utility. Even if this is a coercive narrative, it is still in line with my personal preferences and my ability to exercise my agency. I buy video games. I pay for microtransactions within them. I pay for Netflix and Spotify. These are all coercive, but I still prioritize having them over not having them, because they are a service that provide a net utility gain on the end user. Even if things are profit-based, they can still bring welfare and good things to the end consumer. On the point of addictiveness, it's unclear why this is bad. Even if there is a coercive narrative to use this more than not use it, it's unclear why this is going to be bad at the point where we show that the benefits you can achieve within the metaverse are larger than the benefits you can achieve outside of it. So even if it is addictive, it is making you more coerced to go into things that are going to be a net positive for you as the end user. On the point of, oh, you can still fulfill your identity within the real life, right? I'll get into it later. On the points of data selling, data selling, it exists already in the status quo, and we actively consent to it. Whenever we make a Facebook account, when we make an account on a new web page, when we use Google services, we consent that we are going to be selling a data. What is the inherent harm of that is unclear from OG. What is actually the benefit of that is that we are living as the Zoomer generation, as a new generation native to the internet, where we realize that our data is something that we personally do not use. This is something that we are willing to give up so we can have free services. Otherwise, we would have to pay for services. On to that point, they say targeted ads are going to be bad. I'm going to say targeted ads are a good thing, because I, as the end user, get information on things I might like to buy if I want. This means I get more agency to buy things, since I am going to be spending money on the things that I might prioritize, right? And we explained why there is an incentive of the metaverse to have public buy-in into it, right? And the public that will have access to it are the Zoomers who have specific needs and wants, and they're native to the online era. They're likely have an incentive to limit invasiveness of ads while still accepting that ads are a necessity cost of having a free service, meaning that the new generation is likely bridging the gap between consumer and company and reaching a middle ground. This allows for companies to have ads to increase their profits while still having those ads not invasive to the point where they're unjustly forced upon you to limit your ability to exercise your own agency, right? Onto the smaller points of OG, right? When they say, oh, you can still be assaulted, right? Facebook has an incentive to act in a way that appeases the most people within the metaverse. Insofar as murder and sexual assault make people not happy, Facebook is likely to control it. Cool. On the point of accountability, right? On the point of accountability for a company rises as the company grows larger. Facebook was 15 years ago just a social media company, whatever that might be, right? As it grew, it became more accountable. Politicians have incentives to control it and monitor it at the point where they are shown that this is realistically an impactful thing onto the people that they represent, right? When Facebook became huge, that's when we had the first antitrust laws against Facebook when it's shown that it's huge and impactful, right? When the metaverse becomes a real metaverse, politicians have the same incentive to control the metaverse and have some certain laws and regulations regarding it to make sure that it is going the way that it's supposed to go, that is protecting the rights of people, even if that isn't in the interest of Facebook. But we have shown that it's likely that the interest of the people using the metaverse and the interest of Facebook are going to align to a large extent. Now, onto some other points that OG bring, where they basically concede our case. What Tin has brought to you about the practical benefits was generally left unresponded to, aside from the fact that they say, oh, mathematical models already used in present society, simulations already exist. So OG agreed that simulations help engineers build better structures. They also must agree that simulations are imperfect, considering we do still have buildings collapsing and not being perfectly made, right? So better simulations that more people have access to are inherently going to be a net benefit for people, right? Meaning they can be applied to more situations and can be applied by people who do not have the necessary knowledge to apply perfect mathematical simulation and access to those programs, because metaverse is likely going to be free, as OG implicitly concede, right? Moving on to their POI, in which they kind of try to mechanize in case. oh, the far right might try to use, I'm still heard, right? The far right might try to use it in a bad way, right? It's unclear why. It's unclear why the far right is going to be able to use this in the same way as social movements such as BLM, such as LGBTQ, right? At the point where you can live out the experience of a black man in America, where you can live the experience of a child being bombed in Bosnia, where you can live the experience of a gay man being kicked out of his house. It's unclear how the right has the same access to empathy on that point with their current talking points. Also, if they do use it to emphasize their talking points, this isn't an inherently bad thing, as the right isn't an inherently bad group of people, right? Since OG don't show that the right is inherently bad, this means that they only empathize our point on empathy. Since we're reaching a common ground between the left and right, which is a wide gap that has been only widened in recent years, we need the ability to empathize with the other side. If the right is going to use it to say, oh, live through my life, empathize through my eyes, fill in my shoes, we are going to have more empathy between the left and right, which is an inherent benefit that is present on side OO. They also say, oh, people won't want to experience racism. OG is saying we can read the story about the Syrian child in Naomi's POI. This is the same mechanism that they concede to in Naomi's POI, because this is the reason people read these stories. They want to feel the empathy. They want to see what is happening, right? But moreover, this is mechanized, because when the right says, oh, racism doesn't exist, the left says, well, live the life of a black man, then talk, right? Then you're incentivized to say, oh, fine, let's see what they're actually talking about. Let's live through their shoes. That's the point where you get empathy. Before I move on, closing.
The justification for allowing these technologies to be addictive is that at the end of the day, they will be net positive. But if your ability to make decisions is impaired by your addiction, who decides what is net positive?
And positive is designed on the value that it doesn't bring more utility or disutility. If Shemek wants to run this case and say, oh, addictive things are inherently bad because they're addictive, he also has to stand against cell phones, which are in fact addictive but bring more utility than disutility. Moving on. To the long-term benefits that Tin has talked about, at the point where identity is a tipping point for most people in their ability to access and live a fulfilled life, which is the base need of any single individual. As they are locked out of this life in the majority of life situations, right? You have to be very lucky to be born trans in a family that is going to be accepting of who you are. At this point where you can access this utility, where you can be seen through the same eyes that you want to be seen through, this is the point where you can actually accept that you are, that what your brain thinks you are and what your body is physically shaped into are the same thing, which you are a priori going to be locked out in the physical world. You can access love and relationship, which you might be a priori locked out because you're simply ugly, or because you're simply born in a place where you don't have friends and potential partners which also like you, right? You have the access to the partners and friends or from all over the world, maximizing your agency and therefore achieving a net benefit. For all these reasons, proud to go.